All right, we're going to get started. My name is Hutton Jackson, and I want to welcome everybody in. I'm joined by Justin Byers, Brian Andrews, and Dan Alexander is going to join us a little bit later as well. But welcome everybody to another episode of Bet On Lacrosse, Bet On Lacrosse Twitter space. We're going to try to do these as often as we can throughout the college lacrosse season. We've been doing a few during the NLL season and did some during the PLL season the past couple seasons as well. But to start, I want to introduce my co-speakers today. We got Brian Andrews, Pro Lacrosse Talk and Bet On Lacrosse contributor, also the brainchild behind the Bet On Lacrosse report, as well as Justin Byers, reporter for Front Office Sports, and another fellow lacrosse bettor. And then Dan Alexander will be joining us. He's Bet On Lacrosse co-host as well as a Wager Talk producer, so we'll have his thoughts later as well. But first, before we're going to get into college lacrosse a little bit later, we're going to start off with the NLL. But before we do, I just want to ask you guys some quick thoughts on this college season that's upon us this weekend. We'll start with you, Brian.
Really excited for it. Glad to be back right in time for the season to get started. Busy off season, a lot of transfer portal news. I think this is, set up to be one of the more exciting seasons. And this season does have some big shoes to fill after the way last season ended, especially in the playoffs, with some deep runs from unexpected teams. And I'm hoping we get some similar storylines this year.
How about you, JB?
Yeah, I'm right there with Brian. This year's going to be a lot of fun. Coming off a full year post-COVID playing, this is going to be exciting to see a lot of wealth and talent, and it's spread out pretty well here. There's going to be a lot of parity, I think, throughout college lacrosse this season. So it's going to be a lot to look forward to.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm interested to see, how well Maryland does. Obviously undefeated season last year, pretty much – ran away with it most of the season. Cornell, challenged them a little bit in that championship, but was never really in doubt. It'll be interesting to see how they adapt with some huge losses, but, still a very deep squad going into this season. Virginia is supposed to be, even deeper than last year. Georgetown got a lot of transfers. Syracuse didn't make the top 20, but is, kind of on the cusp there. One of the teams to kind of look out for, just given the incoming freshmen they have. And then, of course, the Ivy League is going to be the Ivy League. A lot of competition there as well. So, yeah, definitely a lot to talk about. We'll get to that a little bit later. We're going to save that for the end. We're going to start off, though, with some NLL talk. So we've been doing pretty well, Brian, with the NLL so far. Last week was a big week for us. Expecting another big week this week as well. Not saying it's easy to read these NLL teams, but I think we've benefited from the fact that we've kind of settled in now, kind of know what teams are and kind of how they match up, and kind of been able to pick our spots too in terms of betting some, underdogs in some West-East division matchups. Still some, surprises. The Rochester Nighthawks are definitely a surprise. They were one of the teams I expected to be better this year and told people to go place a future on them at the start of the season. I did not even expect them to be doing this well. They did get handed their first loss last week to Halifax, but I still think they're a legitimate contender, and it's funny the way the East is kind of shaped up. You have the Rock, Nighthawks, Bandits, Thunderbirds, kind of those top four teams. We expected the Wings to be a little bit better. They've kind of been in free fall mode recently. Did just make that big trade for Mitch Jones. We'll see how that impacts this team, but they're kind of on the outside looking in when it comes to these top four East teams, and of course the Firewolves are kind of been the thorn in the side of some of these teams as well. So interesting to see. And then the West, Seals still at the top, but I wouldn't say the Seals are, I wouldn't say they ran away with the West kind of like we expected them to. I think the Rush are still hanging around there. Roughnecks are a sneaky pick I kind of like as well. Mammoth, kind of a little bit of question marks with them, especially now with Dylan Ward on IR. He's their, MVP from last finals run, MVP of this season, I'd say too. He's kept them in a lot of games. Some that they've been able to pull out, others they haven't looked so good. He landed in the IR right before last game, so that's kind of a big big loss for them, and we'll kind of discuss that in a little bit. But I'm going to run down the NLL futures. I do this every week, so if you follow me on Twitter at Hutton Jackson, you can see where you can get the best number for each of these NLL teams in the futures market. I encourage everybody to line shop. I'm lucky in New Jersey. I have the disposal of all 5 sports books that offer NLL odds, so that's been a huge benefit to me. But even if you have access to FanDuel, DraftKings, and BetMGM, definitely line shop. You can kind of get a better number, and if you look around. So Seals at plus 600, they're still the favorites on FanDuel. Is their longest number. Longest number for the Rock is plus 625. They never really got that long of odds, but they've slowly kind of been a contender. They're kind of the favorite actually on some of these sports books, but you can still get them at plus 625 on Caesars. Nighthawks are plus 800 on Caesars and FanDuel. Bandits plus 700 on FanDuel. Thunderbirds plus 1,000 on Bet365 and BetMGM. Mammoth plus 1,300 on FanDuel. Rush plus 1,200 on DraftKings. Roughnecks plus 1,800 on Caesars. Firewolves plus 2,200 on Caesars. Panther City is plus 2,500 on BetMGM and DK. And then we have the rest of these teams on Caesars. Riptide are plus 2,500. Wings are plus 3,000. Swarm are plus 3,500. Warriors are plus 4,500. And Desert Dogs are plus 5,000 on Caesars, as well as FanDuel. So Caesars loves to post those long numbers. They're anticipating, they're hoping people will line shop and bet on their book, despite, those teams probably not having that realistic of a shot of winning it. So those are where you can get the longest odds. So definitely, like I said, line shop, make sure you get the best number. It will help you out in the long run. I've been able to put together a pretty decent portfolio where if one of, I think it's 7 or 8 teams that I have futures on win, I end up making money off of it. So that just goes to show, the power of line shopping. If I was only using one book, I probably would only have 3 or 4 of those teams would make me money. So that's just another way you can kind of build a portfolio by getting better numbers on different sports books. So that's my 2 cents. You'll hear me say line shop probably every episode and probably get sick of it, but I really do recommend it. Brian, let's go into our NLL Week 10 bets, though, to start off. There's a game that we're eyeing both in this. We kind of have different plays on it, though. So I'll let you kick it off with your best bet of the week for the NLL Week 10 slate.
Yeah, man, like you said, I think we've had a good beat on the season so far. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the favorites have been performing so well. And I'm kind of waiting for the shoe to drop in that sense, where last year we saw early in the season, almost week after week, favorites would be overwhelmingly winning. And then as the season went on, kind of underdogs started creeping up. Teams started finding their groove. And I think we're going to hit that part of the season soon, assuming the season's going to play out like last season, but it feels exactly the same. I think some teams are making trades. Some teams are getting, their sea legs again, maybe with their new players, like the Wings with Joe Reseteras, who is like hit or miss. And we were talking about them kind of being surprisingly underperforming. So I actually have a really light slate for the NLL this week. And we're both eyeing the same game for reasons that you already brought up. The Swarm are playing the Mammoth tomorrow. And the Mammoth are notably missing Dylan Ward, which is a huge loss for them, MVP, like you said. And the Swarm are also a really hungry team. They're currently winless and struggling and really looking for that win, and they're in a really good spot to get it. So I think this is going to be a really offensive-heavy game. The Swarm have, Lyle Thompson and plenty of other weapons on offense, but have been weaker on the defensive side because they also have goaltending issues due to retirements. So I think this has the ability to turn into a complete shootout. And on MGM, you can get over 23.5 in that game at plus 100. And I think that's a great spot and the best spot of the board of the games that are available. There is one game that they haven't posted yet, and that's the Mammoths' second game this weekend, which will be played on Saturday against Las Vegas, which we'll also be looking at and can talk about in a little bit. But that's my pick for this week for the NLL is the Swarm Mammoth over 23.5 at plus 100.
Yeah, I don't hate that pick. I'm a little hesitant because I'll make my point why I'm a little hesitant on that. If it was 22.5, I'd definitely probably hit that over. 23.5 feels about right for me, but plus money, even money there. Definitely don't hate it, especially with Dylan Ward out. Dylan Ward being out is huge, and I think the reason that I'm maybe a little hesitant is because the Mammoth offense has struggled a little bit too, which has led to some lower totals. It's kind of been a combo for them, but definitely don't hate that. But I think if you remember, I'm pretty sure I texted you the week after, or it was a few days after the Bandits Swarm game, their second game. They played each other back to back. That now that Dobson is in net for the Swarm, I really, really like the Swarm team to get a win against the Mammoth. I texted you, this is before we knew Dylan Moore was injured, before the Mammoth even played their last game. The Swarm have kind of been on a little bit of hiatus, but they looked good in that game because they got solid goaltending. And I think it let them be a little bit more aggressive, play the Swarm style of game. They like getting up and down the floor. They have a lot of transition players like Jordan McIntosh. And I feel like they were playing a little bit safe when they had the goaltending struggles with Wendy early on, and I think that led to them. They're still looking for their first win, and I think the reason why is because they couldn't really rely on anybody. We kind of saw that with the Seals a little bit too, where this high-powered Seals offense was kind of winning games for them, but their goaltending issues were a thorn in their side, and it kind of led to their loss against Calgary. Now Origlieri has cemented himself kind of as a starter, and they've kind of come, stabilized a little bit. Again, they got to play a Mammoth team without Dylan Ward, so that certainly helps. But I think goaltending really can dictate how a team plays, and you might want to, maybe the safer bet is to just take Swarm plus 1.5 against the Mammoth team. But I think this is a great spot to bet them on the money line. You can get that at plus 150 on Bet365. I still like it if you get like plus 135 or plus 140. I mean, definitely if you have Bet365, go get that, larger number. But I think it's a great spot to back the Swarm. I'm still worried about the Mammoth offense. I think they have some issues there. We're not being in net should definitely benefit the Swarm as well. And while I don't hate the overplay, I think that the play is to bet Swarm to win this game outright. And I think this is a good spot to bet them. And it's ironic too, because there's another spot this weekend that we can kind of fade the Mammoth, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I haven't been too thrilled with this Mammoth team even from the start. That first loss to the Rush, I was like, okay, let's see how they do next few games. And even in their wins, it still hasn't been a dominant effort. They're really missing Ryan Lee's presence. He's still recovering from that injury he sustained last year. So the Mammoth are a team that, I got a future on them at the beginning of the season, and they're the one that of all the teams, I think I have futures on 8 teams. They're the one team that I would actually end up losing money on if they won the championship, because I haven't really bought back in. A lot of these teams I've gone back to the well. Rochester, I got in at plus 5,000, went back to the well a couple times, even at the number now when it was I think it was plus 1,600 and it's plus 1,400. Haven't gone back now that it's a little bit shorter, but luckily got in a little bit early. But the Mammoth are the team that I just don't see them, overcoming the Rush or the Seals. And I even think Calgary might have a better chance than them at this point. So they're a team that I'm a little cold on right now, and that's why I like backing the Swarm. Another play I like would be my best bet as well is Rush minus 2.5. Now, me and you were able to take advantage of a mispriced line that kind of came out, so we're not necessarily betting that. If you follow me on the Action app or follow Brian on the Action app, where you can track all our plays, you'll see we have some money on that game, but not necessarily Rush minus 2.5, just because we were able to get a better number. But if you missed out on that, I still like Rush minus 2.5, just given the fact that Logan Schuss is going to be out due to injury. Mitch Jones is now out of Vancouver. They released Justin Salt. This Vancouver team is getting ready for a rebuild. Doesn't mean they're not going to be, be able to be competitive still down the stretch, but against this Rush team, I just don't see it happening. So I think that's the spot to bet in that game. And that would be my other best bet. I would probably suggest as well. But let's move on to extra money opportunities, our EMOs, as Dan Newbert coined a couple years ago. What do you like as an EMO for this week in the NLL?
Not a lot of great plus money opportunities. Like you're saying, like if you're looking at Rush Warriors, like I don't think the Warriors are in a good upset spot. We already talked about the Swarm, so we can't really give that up for an EMO. So kind of sparse good plus money spots this week. But one good one is the Nighthawks money line. Again, they're underdogs against the Bandits. The books seem really reluctant to make the Nighthawks favorites against Bandits and Thunderbirds teams that they've shown that they can compete against, but then also lost against them. So the Nighthawks are in a really weird spot, but you can get a good price on them, plus 150 at Bet365. But you can also get it still at like plus 120, I think, on DraftKings. So there's still good numbers out there. And as coin flippy as games have been between the top 3 to 4 teams, taking the underdog on average, I think, ends up netting pretty positive in the long run. So Nighthawks money line is a good spot given their performance. They finally got their first loss, and I think they're going to bounce back pretty well from that.
Yeah, I love that spot as well. And that to me is a numbers play. I mean, we saw the Nighthawks already beat the Bandits, so no book should be hanging a plus 150. That wasn't a fluke win. That was a solid win. This should be a pick'em. It is a pick'em on some of these books. I'd probably bet this, down to like probably plus 110. I'm betting it because I love the price. I think this is going to be a close game. I don't think the Nighthawks are going to run away with it. I think we'll see another tight game, and wouldn't surprise me if the Bandits win. But Josh Burns, we don't know his status. He might be out for this game. I mean, the Bandits are a solid team. Again, like I think it's going to be close, but if you're giving me an opportunity to bet a half unit and win a full unit, I'm going to take that, on a team that had already beaten this team previously, so I don't know why that price is out there, but, let's use it to our advantage. And I definitely like that play. More of a actual, like less, from a numbers perspective, but just a play that I like is, again, Calgary has really been a darling as an underdog. I bet them against the Seals when they won that game. I think I bet them both times against the Seals. I lost the first one, won the second one, but they just play teams tight. We saw it last week against the Rock. And I think they have a chance to potentially upset Halifax here, at least cover the 1.5, which you can get at plus 105 on Caesars. So that's my other extra money. It's a smaller extra money play, but I like Calgary plus 1.5. I even like them on the money line as well if you want to get bold, but you're getting plus money already on the spread. So I like that as a bet, a little bit more conservative there because, I do think it's going to be a tight game and kind of get that overtime insurance. It's always nice when you have a plus 1.5 and then it goes to overtime and you can just kick back and not care who wins. And I will say, I don't know if it's moved yet, but if you go to FanDuel, if you have access to FanDuel, they actually posted a Halifax plus 1.5. It might be flopped. It might have been flipped by now, but if you do like Halifax, that's kind of floating out there. That was definitely a misprice as well, because they do have Halifax as favorites on the money line, but for some reason they accidentally gave them the plus 1.5. So just something to look out for on there as well. If you do like Halifax instead of Calgary. Personally, I like Calgary, but if you like Halifax, you can get a better number out there as well. I think it's minus 122 to bet them plus 1.5. So always line chop, as I say. And then the last spot we'll talk about for the NLL before we move a little bit on to the PLL Championship Series is historically, we saw last week that Bandits were able to buck this trend, but I believe it is now, I think it's 4-13. No, I think it's 5-12. So teams that are playing their second game of the weekend against a fresh team, so on short rest, are only 5-12 straight up, and I believe it's 4-13 against the spread. I'll double check that. I'll tweet that out. That's a trend that I love. It already hit earlier this year with Panther City, and it hit with Toronto beating Halifax. Bandits were able to overcome that, but playing it on short rest is historically very hard. So you have the Mammoth that are going to play a tough game, we think, against the Swarm on a Friday night, and then go and have to play a Las Vegas team on Saturday. Again, this Vegas team isn't that good, but keep your eye out. The odds aren't out yet for that game. Keep your eye out. If Vegas gets a plus 1.5 or gets a favorable spot on the money line, I'm going to bet Vegas. I'm going to try, go for this trend again. It doesn't always work out, but I like this a lot better than I did Riptide Bandits. I still like, the Riptide to cover the spread last week against the Bandits, especially getting a 2.5, but, Bandits were able to overcome that. I don't know if Colorado will be able to overcome short rest against a scrappy Vegas team that's looking better as the weeks progress. So, we'll see what happens, but that's a spot that has been pretty profitable over the past 2 years. Moving on now to the PLL Championship Series. We're not going to spend too much time on this because we don't have lines. We do have future odds on 4 different books, so you can get future odds on Bet365, Caesars, DraftKings, and FanDuel. I'll just run down again like I did with the NLL where you can get the longest odds. So the Archers are the favorites across the books. Their longest odds are plus 235 on Caesars. Now there's only 4 teams and it's a round robin type of format. So we'll talk about this a little bit, but I don't know if I'm really getting to the window to bet any of these. And I don't know if I even will, maybe right before I'll look at the schedule and see, okay, I like this team. The schedule itself they're playing all the other 3 teams. But if you like their first 2 matchups, then maybe it's time to get a future on them now. But again, every team makes the playoffs. It's, you could have a team go 3-0 and then get bounced in that, semifinal matchup. So I don't think there's too much value on betting a future, but we will go down the list. So Archer's longest odds, plus 235 on Caesars. Atlas, plus 265 on Caesars. Whipsnakes, plus 325 on Caesars. So they're the 3rd team on most books, but actually the longest odds on Caesars. And then Chrome, plus 350 on DraftKings. So again, knee-jerk reaction, I really don't know. This format, 6s and these rosters, it's tough to tell. I think the Whipsnakes are getting a little disrespected. having some of their guys is going to hurt, but like they still have a good core of guys. It's not like the Chrome that are missing a little bit more pieces to the NLL season. And even the Archers, I'm a little surprised that they're so heavily favored. They're not going to have Tom Schreiber, and I think defensively, they do have Adam Gittleman in net, I believe, or is he playing? I don't know. Brian, do you know, is he playing in the championship series? I forget.
I don't know for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is, considering he was involved in the U.S. men's team sixes.
I know they signed with Shuda. So, but
yeah.
Anyway, a lot of unknowns. So my recommendation, don't bet any of these, but maybe look at the schedule and you're like, okay, I think, let's say you like the Whipsnakes to win their first 2 games. Hey, maybe you do want to get in right now. The Whipsnakes and Chrome are the 2 that I would kind of eye. Archers Atlas, it's like, their odds aren't probably going to get much shorter or longer unless they drop a few games. But I don't know. Futures, I just don't think are the way to play it. I'm excited to bet on this, and it'll be interesting to see how the books set lines, but not really rushing to do any of that. And I know Dan wasn't able to pop on yet, but he had a gun to his head to pick. He said the Whips. He likes Carlson's deadly and tight. Bernlohr is also, a good goalie. So he's also kind of on our side with not betting these, but he does like the Whips value at the price that they're at right now. And is kind of thinking the Archers are probably the favorite just because of the offensive firepower that they have. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, and we're definitely looking forward to it. I don't know, Justin, do you have any thoughts on the PLL Championship Series? Did you bet any of these futures, or are you kind of staying away like us?
Yeah, this one's tough just because of the number of teams we've got in the rosters. But, kind of looking at it now and kind of going off what you guys were just saying, the roster that's most appealing to me is this Atlas team, just because it seems like they've got the best collection of athlete, and looks like they also have the best guys with the best sticks. With Drake Porter and Jack Conklin as your goalies, I feel pretty safe there. But anytime you've got Costa Beal and Chris Gray on the same team, and especially Dox Aitken too, you can have some success. So I'm liking the Atlas team.
Yeah, I honestly think they should probably be favored just given their roster. And, Joe Keegan tweeted out that Romar Dennis and Costa Beal have the most 13-yard goals in the PLL. Of the players on these championship series rosters, they each have 19. And that's something also to watch. Now that the arc has moved in 2 yards from 15 to 13, we're going to see a few more 2-pointers. It'll be interesting to see how coaches factor that in, because even though the arc was moved in a yard from the MLL, we haven't really seen teams effectively deploy like a strategy to score 2s. You think of the chaos in the bomb squad in that first season, but that was, again, more of a transition style. No team has really actually put an emphasis on trying to score 2-pointers because it's still a very low percentage shot in this league. 13 yards, though, that's a big difference. So it'll be interesting to see if teams really pull up. And then, the rule of ball going out of bounds, there's not really runouts in 6s. Our team's a little bit more conservative, though. That's also going to be interesting. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Definitely looking forward to it, but not sure how they'll play it. I don't know, Brian, you have any similar thoughts?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I need to see from the rosters is what are the short stick defensive midfielder squads looking like for each of these teams. All of these teams are missing notable players. Like the Atlas are missing Danny Logan because he's on the Seals, for example. And I really like that you guys all brought up, for example, the closer 2-point arc, because it's going to force shorty defensive players to pressure out to avoid short-range 2-point shots because they are low percentage. You don't want their hands to be free, and they don't get the run out. So you want to be able to pressure out there, and teams who struggle there, I think, are going to open themselves up to shots on the inside, maybe easy 2-point attempts, which would benefit the Atlas a lot. And a lot of short stick defensive middies are going to need to be able to run transition offense. Who's going to be available for what roster and succeed in that in the 6s format? So for that reason alone, I'm holding off from any of these futures. But that's one of the things that I'm looking at the most is who's going to have the best short six defensive midi core.
Yeah, for sure. And the other interesting thing too is, hopefully they'll set totals, but how do these sportsbooks set totals? Because obviously the arcs moved in closer. a little bit faster pace, shorter field. These totals are going to have to look a little bit different than what we're used to as well. So it'll be interesting to see if like the numbers are high enough for us to play unders, or if you're just like, I'm going to bet the over because I expect a lot of goals too. You know, there's not really a lot of research. It's tough to go off of. It's going to be kind of like a feel it out for a couple games, I think. But definitely interested to see how betting looks for this PLL Championship Series. We'll move on now to NCAA. Brian, you want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do now with the Bet On Lacrosse report for NCAA this season?
Yeah, sure. So if you've listened to the channel a lot, we reference the betting reports for the respective leagues very frequently for the NLL and PLL, and there's a sign-up form on the Pro Lacrosse Talk website to gain access to those. They're interactive data reports, which give you teams, who they play against, what lines they get, general trends, league-wide trends for the money line spread and totals. You can see matchups, who's scoring the most, whose offense is the least consistent, most consistent, stuff like that. And you can see trends along the whole season. And we've been talking for a long time about introducing a similar product for the NCAA, but we've had to discuss about what we're going to track and what we're not. And this year, we are going to commit to tracking that information sufficient for a report. So if you are interested in that, make sure you go sign up on the Pro Lacrosse Talk website to gain access to the NCAA report, which we'll probably wait to release for like 2 weeks, because the report in week 1 for any of these seasons, NCAA, NLL, PLL, are pretty useless because you only have a couple of teams show up. They'll only have 1 game played at most. So there's not a lot information to take advantage of. But by week 2, the report should be pretty rich in information by that point, with how many teams play on any given week in the NCAA. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll start referencing that more on the show in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been a very valuable resource for the PLL and NLL in terms of, looking at macro trends, like how teams against the spread have done, like especially like, 2.5 point spreads that we don't see too often. It's nice to kind of be able to reference that, as well as like micro trends too. Like, we mentioned the trend of teams on short rest. You have to do a little bit of, your own kind of digging in the report to do that. But, those are the type of things that it's valuable for us to be able to go back and look at like previous seasons. And unfortunately, we just didn't have the bandwidth to do it last season, but we're committed to it this year. And, like you said, it will take a couple weeks for it to be actual use, because, there is no data to go off of yet. But once we kind of get to see those macro trends, like, how what's the average total, kind of being in the NCAA, and then kind of are these going over or under, it should be of value. There's no blind way to play a lot of these games, but it can definitely help you become a more informed and kind of better, and also kind of make decisions too in a more informed way, where you look at a total like, oh, that looks high to me, but is it really high in relation to a lot of these other games? That's something that can be of use. So yeah, definitely be on the lookout for that. And before we kind of get into our best bets and extra money opportunities, let's talk a little bit of some of the line movement. So lines opened up, I think, about a month ago, and we kind of put out a pod and gave our initial thoughts on that. I'm kind of seeing some line movement. The game that had the most line movement is Jacksonville. They were minus 155 on the money line. And they're now minus 115 and a pick 'em with Hopkins. So Hopkins is also minus 115 on DraftKings. Although if you like Hopkins, you can actually still get them at plus 110 on Caesars. So if you have access to Caesars, better number out there than the one on DraftKings. And they are still 1.5 point underdogs, but that's a line that's really blown up. So you could, if you would have bought into it initially, you would have had to lay, I think, minus 110 to bet Jacksonville minus 1.5. Now plus 135 to lay 1.5 with Jacksonville. I don't think that line will flip. Books usually don't want to flip lines, especially like that, because they're fine moving in a point if needed, but a game that close, they're not going to want to flip the line and end up having liability on both sides like that. So you won't see the line flip. You might see a slightly better price as we get closer to game time. I just think that Hopkins is, we'll get into this a little bit later, but I just think Hopkins is getting a lot of love because of their name. But people might be overreacting just because of the fact that Jacksonville played really well last year. They did lose to Hopkins last year in their first game. So, still trying to look for that first win against Hopkins, but, wouldn't be surprised if they end up not only winning, but covering. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then Duke, 11.5 point favorites against Bellarmine. They're now 10.5 point favorites. So if you liked Duke initially, you can kind of get a better price on them now if you waited. We hopped on the Bellarmine just because 12 goals is a lot, even for a Duke team that we think is going to be a little bit better this year. I don't know, I don't know how much better they're going to be this year. And I just think that is a lot to lay. And the last time they beat a team by 12 or more in their season opener was 2018 when they went to the NCAA championship, I believe. So not too crazy about, laying 10.5 with them. I don't know now, I'm of the belief that if I can't get that first number, Bellarmine 11.5, I don't know if I'd recommend getting the 10.5, but still a large spread to be laying, even for a Duke team that many expect to be pretty good this year. But just something to look out for. And then finally, not necessarily line movement, but Maryland 7.5 on DraftKings, 7.5 point favorites, only 6.5 point favorites on Caesars. So no line movement with those, but just something to look out for. Again, if you like Maryland, go ahead and bet it on Caesars. If you like Richmond, go ahead and bet it on DraftKings so you can get the better number there. Don't recommend middling, but that's also an opportunity too if you really want to try to think that Maryland's only going to win by exactly 7 goals. You could win both bets, but don't recommend doing that. Let's go to best bets, though. Let's start with you, Justin. Give us your best bet for the NCAA opening weekend.
Yeah, to start things off, I'm rolling with the Buckeyes, minus 5.5 against Air Force. And I'm really high on this Ohio State team heading into this year. I think this is probably the most well-rounded team we've seen from the Buckeyes in a little bit. And plus, they're kind of kicking things off. There's a rejuvenation around the program with the new stadium and with the talent they have. And so I haven't seen much, of course, from that Air Force team, even what we saw last year. The only real threat I think they have is Brandon Todd. Other than that, I think the Buckeyes, from a defensive standpoint, might have their way. And the Buckeyes, they returned Jack Myers and Colby Smith, which they were their 2 leading scorers last year. I think they pick up right where they left off. I like that number at 5.5. I wouldn't go anywhere over that, just in case we do see a little bit of early season jitters, a lot of turnovers. I know the weather's probably going to be around 30 degrees in Columbus, so we'll see how that goes. But I feel comfortable with this 5.5 just because of the team that the Buckeyes are going to have out there.
Yeah, that's an interesting pick. And, you got Marcus Hudgens now transferring from Army to Ohio State. He's inserted into that lineup, to a defense that was already pretty good last year. So definitely don't hate that play at all. And it'll be interesting to see how the Buckeyes do this season. Kind of a little underwhelming of a season last year. They had some big wins, but, really it was Maryland's conference to lose in that Big Ten. So Rutgers was the closest to kind of making a chance at Maryland, but they didn't even come that close. So it'll be interesting to see how Ohio State does. Bobby Van Buren's also another guy on that defense that was a stud last year. So we'll see how this defense does, but definitely don't hate that play. Brian, what are you thinking for best bets?
I absolutely love finding value in mid-major games where I think the books have less information to go off of and pay attention a little bit less. So I'm going to talk about Mount St. Mary's versus Navy. Mount St. Mary's opened at plus 5.5, probably around minus 120. I don't remember the exact number. And it's since moved to plus 6.5 against Navy. I don't particularly see Navy as a high scoring threat. Mount St. Mary's actually got a win last year against Navy for the first time in program history, even though they've only played against each other, I think, like 4 times. And before 2021, it was like the 2000s when they last played. So there's not a lot of historical data to go off of, but it's early season. I don't think Navy is an offensive powerhouse, and I don't think Mount St. Mary's is particularly great either, but for Navy to win by 7 or more, I think is a heavy ask for the first game of the season. So I'm going to roll with the dog in this one, Mount St. Mary's plus 6.5.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I forgot about that as a one that had the line move a little bit. And, that's one of those spreads too that, even if Navy gets out to a pretty decent lead, like that back door is always going to be open for Mount St. Mary's. So definitely don't hate that play as well. I think that's a good one. And especially given the history of the teams, you can't look at past performances as indicative of, future results. But the fact that Mount St. Mary's was able to win against Navy last year is enough to kind of get me to also probably bet that plus 6.5 as well. So kind of like that. It'll be interesting to see how Navy does now with Xavier Arline, in the fold for the full season, presumably. He is also still doing spring workouts too with the football team. probably going to be the starting quarterback for Navy next year as well, depending on, what they do. But yeah, definitely interesting there. I'm going Utah plus 2.5. It's now down to minus 115. I think it might have been at plus money at one point. Maybe even money or plus 105, but now down to minus 115. I still like it. Might sprinkle on the money line as well. They've played this Denver team tight though the past 2 seasons. Denver's going to be without Jack Hanna. Alex Simmons is now at Syracuse. I know it's Tierney's last home opener, but I think this Utah team is going to be competitive. They're returning, their leading scorer, leader in ground balls, leader in caused turnovers. Like, this team is going to look pretty similar to what it did last year. And they've come so close to beating Denver the past 2 seasons, losing by 1 in both their past 2 matchups. So I think plus 2.5 is a gift. I feel like this should be more like a 1.5 game, but maybe the books are trying to entice us on that. But that's my favorite bet for in terms of just a best bet. Kind of lean towards the under too. That under did move from 25.5 to 24.5 now, though. Don't like it as much at 24.5. I feel like these teams do tend to play a little bit slower pace, and I think it is going to be low scoring. But last year we saw 27 goals between these 2 teams. I know I was definitely on the under in that game, and it didn't hit. So I'm a little scared to bet the under again this game, but I do have a half unit on it. But best bet, Utah plus 2.5. Now moving on, we'll go to our extra money opportunities. I'll just give Dan's right now. He's not on right now, but he likes Utah's money line, a little sprinkle of that at plus 200. I think it was plus 220. Again, moved a little bit, but still, he likes Utah to get that upset. So that's his extra money opportunity. Justin, what's your extra money opportunity?
Yeah, we're kind of building off of what Brian was talking about when it comes to the mid-majors. I'm rolling with Merrimack in this one. I know it's one of those games that I know some people might be hesitant to bet on just because of the youth of the program itself in Merrimack. But if you look at their schedule last year, they were competitive, and they kept themselves in a lot of games. I think what I counted, there was only 2 to 3 games that they lost by 4 goals or less. So they're right there. And I think they take another step forward with another year of experience under their belt. And, I expect them to come out the gate wanting to prove something. So with Hofstra being what it is right now, they've had their glory days in the past. But I haven't seen much from this team in the past 2 seasons. So I'm taking Merrimack on this one.
Yeah, another good spot there to back a team that, is kind of coming into their own. A team that kind of caught my eye a little bit, but I'm not going to bet it. I probably should have mentioned this in our best bet section or prior to that. But it is interesting to see. It's a lot of points, 11.5. That's why I mentioned that I was on Bellarmine, not Duke. But Marquette's playing Lindenwood. That's making the jump to D1 this year. I'm just wondering how big of an adjustment that's going to be for them. Again, I'm not saying bet this, but that's just a spread that is enticing to me just because it's 11.5. I just gave a reason why I liked Bellarmine to cover 11.5, but I'd probably almost go Marquette just because of the fact that this team is making the jump to D1. I don't know, just something that kind of caught my eye looking at these odds. Don't have a play on it either way, but definitely interesting to kind of pick your spots with teams that have programs that are maybe just starting out or again making that jump to D1. And I know team that's been at D1 for a long time, but kind of in bottom tier a little bit is VMI. But you have a play on this game, Brian. They're playing Detroit Mercy. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so continuing down the mid-major rabbit hole, I was scrolling through the games. This line wasn't up when we originally talked about it, but VMI is playing Detroit Mercy, and I love this spot for VMI purely from a narrative perspective. Obviously, historical data is not, indicative of future results, but listen to the story of this game from last year, for example. VMI is a 4-win team last year. Detroit Mercy is like a 2-win team last year. They play early in the season last year. VMI goes up 9-4 in the first quarter and is held scoreless in the second half of the game by Detroit Mercy and loses 16-11. I know VMI, those guys in the locker room, have been punching air for literally over a year. This game is circled on their calendar. Detroit Mercy is not a team that probably had a lot of growth in one offseason. I think VMI is going to try to open the season with an absolute bang and come in swinging against this Detroit Mercy team. So I'm taking VMI on the money line at plus 120. just a hilariously fun story for me to follow, and it gets me hype about a mid-major game that I otherwise probably wouldn't have watched. So go VMI, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of betting is, getting to watch games that you maybe didn't have any interest in and root, even if your team's losing by 6, but if you have them at plus 6.5, you can kind of still have some stake late in the game, even during some of these blowouts. So, yeah, I don't hate that at all. And in terms of these games in general, before I get to my extra money opportunity and kind of wrap it up, I know you're on this as well, Brian, but I do recommend, just have a little discipline with this first weekend because there's still a lot of unknowns about these teams, and it'll probably take a few weeks for us to, kind of get a good picture of what these teams are, especially college, a lot of turnover each year. So don't go and bet, the whole slate. We're giving you a lot of plays here. Don't feel like you have to bet them all. I only really, I think I'm betting, 4 games officially. I have a bet on Duke Bellarmine, a bet on Syracuse minus 2.5. Although that wouldn't be one of my strong plays. I only have a half unit on it. So don't feel bad about, throwing some half unit on plays if you like the play, but you're still kind of a little uncertain. Like, and if it's a play that you feel like you would be mad that you didn't bet, but it's one that you're still also not super confident in, throw a half unit on, or just, make your unit size a little bit smaller for those, or just jot them down for the first week, and see how you do. If you're not comfortable actually putting, real money to it, that's also a good way if you're starting out. But don't feel like you have to bet all these plays that we're giving out. Just be smart with your money. That's something we always try to preach, is responsible gambling. We do indulge in some parlays sometimes, but we're not big on, giving out parlays. You won't really hear us give out parlays. Although, with some of these favorites, it is probably not a bad idea. If you're putting, Maryland or Duke in a parlay, you're probably going to come out as a winner, but you're also still probably going to lay a lot of juice if you're just doing like a 2-teamer like that. So all in good fun for those. Don't just make it all you do. Some of these lotto ticket parlays look fun on paper and they're great when they hit, but long term, not as profitable. So, pick your spots for those is what I'd recommend. But with that, I will give you my extra money opportunity. I know you're on this as well, Brian. Jacksonville, minus 1.5, plus 135. I like them on the money line too at minus 115 if you want to, save yourself from this potentially being an overtime game and losing your bet before it gets to overtime. But I think Jacksonville is going to win this game. I think they'll win by a margin. I don't think it's going to be a runaway, but I do like them to cover that 1.5 spread. I like that bet before it moved to plus 135. I probably would have bet this even if it was, minus odds, but I just like Jacksonville in this spot. I think Hopkins is getting a lot of money just because of their pedigree, and Jacksonville, they beat UNC. UNC is probably not going to be as good as we've typically seen from them, but beat UNC in the scrimmage. Not returning a few people on defense, but same goaltenders last year. They have high expectations. They went 14-2 last year before losing by 1 goal to Richmond and missing out on their first NCAA playoff berth. I think they're hungry, and I think they're going to be, a competitor in this season, and currently ranked 18th, I think, in both USA, Nike poll, as well as Inside Lacrosse. So, favored for a reason, I think, in this spot, and I think you're getting a good price on them to cover the spread against Hopkins. Despite losing to Hopkins last year, I still think this is a good spot. Brian, anything you want to add on that game? Sorry if I stole some of your thunder on that one.
No, I left it for you on purpose. I think we're in total agreement, and I'm mad I didn't wait. I thought actually it opened at 120 plus 125, and I went on it immediately we saw some scrimmage results, which shouldn't really be the whole basis of the play. We like the price and the line, given Hopkins.
I did say too, they lost to Lynchburg in a scrimmage, so beating UNC but losing to Lynchburg kind of cancels out. Maybe you can't. The scrimmage is different. Like, I mean, we both played. You sometimes play 5 quarters or whatever. Not really a quarter, I guess. Yeah. 5 periods. So take it for what it's worth. But I think this roster on paper is good enough to beat this Hopkins team that I think is going to be better. But I just don't think it's the Hopkins team that we've seen of previous years. I think people are still buying into this price. You're going to see the Hopkins and the Syracuses of the world get a lot of public action. People are going to be going to bet them. So the books know that. They set these lines accordingly. So just be careful. Don't just bet based on name. Definitely look at the matchup and some of these up-and-coming programs. Like, we mentioned the Utah earlier, and Denver at one point was an upcoming program. But some of these up and coming programs can hang with the best of them. So it's starting to be a little bit more parity in this NCAA. Sorry, I cut you off there. But...
No, you're fine. I mean, the play is more of a fate of Hopkins more than it is my love of Jacksonville, even though last year they were a really fun team to follow and a very lucrative team to bet on, as someone who was underestimated by the books to begin with. So it's nice to see them getting a little bit of respect, but it's funny to see the price for the -1.5 go from plus 125 to 135. So public sentiment seems to be on Hopkins' side, whereas we're advertising Jacksonville's side. So just an interesting thing to keep track of.
And it didn't even open at plus 125. I think we both bet it at plus 125 like last week, but when it opened, it was I believe like -110. Like it was a pretty standard line. It's just inflated because, you know, Hopkins has got bet down. I mean, Hopkins, I think was like plus 130 probably on the money line, and now all the way down to -115, you know, and essentially a pick 'em. So a good amount of money for them to move that line. And although this is a game that I wouldn't, you know, hate betting a money line play on Jacksonville if you're not comfortable laying the spread, I think the other thing to think about with betting these games is picking your spots too, and being willing to actually, you know, there's two schools of thought too with like unit size, but I usually risk what I can make a unit on. So let's say if I'm betting, you know, something's -110, I will bet 1.1 unit to make 1 unit. That's how I bet. And so don't be afraid to kind of bet these spots where if it's plus money, I'm just betting a unit each time. So sometimes when you're betting long-term, I've been doing this a lot with the NLL where I could lay a little bit more money to get that plus 1.5. But if I really like a team to cover the plus 1.5, you know, I probably like them to win outright as well. So I'll lean towards the money line. Does it burn you sometimes? It burned me against Sask and, you know, San Diego. Saskatchewan lost in overtime. Whereas if I had that plus 1.5, I would have won my bet. But to me, it's like I'm still losing less than what I would have probably bet if they ended up losing by 2. So long way of saying, you know, don't lay so much money. Like I rarely lay anything more than -140. And sometimes if you see some of these spreads, like if you like a Syracuse, you know, I'm trying to see where they're at right now. For some reason, I don't see them on here. But Syracuse is -2.5. But I'll use the VMI as an example. You could bet VMI. You could lay, you know, -125 to bet VMI plus 1.5. Hey, maybe they win. Maybe they only lose by 1. But the odds of them only losing by 1 are probably much thinner than them winning outright. So you betting them on the money line, I think, is the right call because you can get a better price on it. And you're not risking as much. A lot of it comes down to not only like, you know, making a lot of money, but how much you're willing to risk. And so if you're going to bet some of these heavy favorites, you know, just be careful. Like you shouldn't really be betting. Like don't go out and bet Maryland on the money line at -2,800, you know. You're not going to get that big of a return in the long run. It's not going to hurt you. Like if Maryland's going to win, they're probably going to win by margin. So if you like them well enough, bet them on the spread, you know, and if you don't, stay off of it. So you don't have to bet everything, but just being smart, you know, with how much you risk as well. So that's my last sense. Anything parting thoughts?
Sorry, Hutton.
I said any parting thoughts from you guys? Brian, you go first, and then Justin, you can wrap it up.
Yeah. I just want to comment on that real fast. It's also a price thing. Like if VMI was only like -105 on the money line, I might take the extra point with the plus 1.5 at -120. But given that the money line is so inflated and I get such a higher return for that one goal, I go money line anyway. So you can also think about it that way. Like if the money line price is so much better than the plus 1.5, if the plus 1.5 is too juiced, it might just be worth sacrificing the odd of them losing by 1 goal. That's my closing thoughts. I thought that was a good spiel that you were on, though.
Yep, agreed.
JB, what's up, man?
Yeah, I think just something to take into account is these first couple weeks, not every single team is going to have the same number of games played. So that's going to be something to watch as we go along. There's going to be, more teams with more experience as the first couple of weeks go on. So just take that into consideration.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, and the other thing too, I recommend, like I said too, with like John down plays, if you're not comfortable, once these games end on Saturday and Sunday rolls around, we probably won't get odds till usually Monday, Tuesday night. I like to look at the next week's games and just pick your spots, kind of set your own odds, see like what you would like. And then when the odds come out, see if, it kind of aligns. If it aligns, then you're probably going to stay off of that. If there's an outlier, then that's where you kind of want to pick your spots and stuff. So that's something too. Like sometimes we do get caught up too in like the price. Like I'm not betting Jacksonville -1.5 because it's +135. I love that it's +135. I'm definitely not complaining about it, but I would still like it, down to -110. Whereas if you're only betting because of the price, you can kind of get into a bad habit of, getting, going after the eye-catchy like plus money plays, and it's not always profitable to do that. You want to pick your spots with that type of stuff. You want to kind of ask yourself, if the line was reversed, would I like the other team? That's kind of a good rule of thumb too. And if you would like the other team, then you're probably going more off price than you are. If you would flip the line and you're like, I don't like the other team, then you actually probably have a pretty good play there because you like that team for a variety of reasons, not just because of the price. So that's another kind of good rule of thumb as well. But that's going to do it for our show this week. Appreciate everybody tuning in. If you came in late, you can listen to the recording. I'm also going to try to pop this up on our podcast feed as well. Hoping to do this as frequently as possible. I don't want to commit to every week, but we're going to try to do it as much as possible. I know Brian is hard at work too on that betting report, so we'll keep you guys posted on that. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and good luck on all your bets this weekend.